When I was diagnosed with cancer, for me, that was as if life had just said no. I wasn't that old, but I thought I was going to die. The word cancer was the equivalent of death. And as a Christian, of course, I use the Bible as a reference for inspiration. And a lot of Christians only read the Bible from the standpoint of thou shalt not and do's and don'ts. But for me, the Bible is much more than a book of rules and regulations. The Bible really reveals the character and personality of God. And so as a Christian, I use the Bible to understand what God's will might be and what God's ability might be in light of my situation. And that's how black people, in large measure, have used the Bible since we arrived in North America. The Bible says that if you're in prison, like Joseph was, you could go from being a prisoner to being president, like Mandela did. The Bible says that if you're enslaved, like the children of Israel were in Exodus, you can be liberated, like black people were in North America. And so the Bible, when read the way I read it, is encountered properly. The Bible gives you a sense of not just what you should and should not do, but what God is able to do. And so I went to the Bible, to John chapter 9, because I knew that although I had cancer, John chapter 9 was a reminder that God can heal. And in that instance, God was healing a man who had been born without sight. And by the end of John chapter 9, the Bible reveals that Jesus had healed the man, and people were astounded. So I decided that I would meditate on John chapter 9. When you have cancer, you really don't want to talk to a lot of people at first. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I really didn't even want to talk to my wife because my life just shut down. But I knew I had to get past that point. I had to make decisions about treatment. I didn't want to die prematurely, even if cancer was going to kill me. So I went to John chapter 9 as my biblical reference for inspiration. Some people go to Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Many people go to Psalm 121, I'll look to the hills from whence cometh my help. The Bible is a source of inspiration, and the Bible reveals what God is able and therefore willing to do in your situation at that time. And so I read John chapter 9 looking for hope, looking for help, looking for the assurance that the power of God through Jesus Christ was able to heal me. And if I trusted in that, if I believed in that, if I prayed about that, then God would deliver and God would show up. So I started reading John chapter 9, and instantly it occurred to me that John chapter 9 would not only reveal what God through Christ could do for me, but John chapter 9 really indicated through the man who had been born blind what I probably needed to do for myself. And the very first sentence says, Jesus was walking along and he saw a man who had been born blind. And that struck me because what it suggests is that the man woke up that morning and said to himself, I'm blind, but I'm only blind. I can walk, I can talk, I can feel, I can eat, I can get dressed, which means that by the time Jesus came to this man's neighborhood, the man had started his day and was outside. Jesus didn't go to the blind man's house, knock on his door and say, let me heal you. Had the man not had enough courage, had the man not had enough energy, had the man had just given up because he had been born blind and been a victim, Jesus would have never seen him. And just verse 1 of John chapter 9 encouraged me to not just crawl up in my cancer corner and wait for death, but get up. I've got cancer, but that's all I've got. When I went to the doctor said, listen, you're in the best shape a man your age could be. Your heart is good. Your blood pressure is good. Everything is good about you except cancer. I had been walking 4 miles a day all year. In fact, this was the best year of my life. And so when the doctor said, you have cancer, but there's nothing else wrong with you, It reminded me of that man in John chapter 9 who was blind, but there was nothing else wrong with him. And that's why he was able to encounter Jesus. It's why he was available to receive his healing. And then when Jesus' disciples questioned Jesus about the blind man, who sinned was their question, like church people will do. They were judging him. He ignored them. And you just have to ignore people. You have to ignore all of the advice. You know, when you get cancer or have a cold, there is unlimited information through people that know you as to what you should do. And I had to begin screening out voices and ignoring people, because people will come to conclusions about you that are inappropriate for your situation. And then, then Jesus spits on mud and puts mud in the man's eye. Now, I know as spiritual people and deeply committed Christians to the Bible, I know that sounds real deep. But can you imagine? Here's a man born blind. He's around strangers. He had never encountered Jesus before. And Jesus spits on mud, puts the mud in the man's eye, which makes his blindness even worse. But remarkably, the man stands there. He doesn't run, he doesn't cuss, he doesn't fuss. This man senses that even though bad has become worse, something is worth hanging around for. And then Jesus sends the man to the wrong pool. In my book, Say Yes When Life Says No, I talk about why this man was willing to go to a pool where no one had ever been healed before. And that changed my whole mentality, because often we go where everybody else goes. We follow the crowd, the majority rules. That's what democracy says. But sometimes you have to do something no one has ever done in order to receive something you've never received. I did not know anybody who had been operated on by a robot. I decided that my cancer should be extracted from my body by a robot. This was before AI. This was before a lot of the new technology. And it was the best decision I could have made at that time for my life. I had no one to talk to about it, because I didn't know anybody who had surgery performed by a robot. Likewise, this man didn't know anybody who had been healed by going to the specific pool that Jesus sent him to be healed by. So all of these things, all of these instances, all of these examples that I got from this blind man convinced me that I was not reading John chapter 9 to see what God was going to do for me. I was reading John chapter 9 so this blind man could teach me about the things I had to do for myself.